Welcome to lecture number 4, week 4. I'm so glad that you're still with us and that we can share a little bit of information that's in addition to what you've been reading about in the book and what you've been watching on the videos and also learning from your study guide. So this week we're talking about Plains Indians. The Plains is a gigantic area. It goes from up at the top, Canada, all the way down to the bottom of Texas. And it starts over in the Midwest near the Missouri River and goes all the way up into the Rocky Mountains. So I don't know if you've actually driven, I know you probably flew over those places, but if you've ever driven through it, it's a long, long way. And it's all different sorts of different countryside, deserts, plains, which used to be 6-foot, 8-foot tall prairie grass when the buffalo lived there, river bottoms, rolling hills, and moving its way on in the west towards mountains. So the weather is also very different. Up in the north, it's freezing cold, probably right now, and long winters, harsh winters. As you go south to Texas, usually warmer winters. During the summer, warm pretty much everywhere in the plains. So it's an interesting, huge area that's considered to be one region as far as Native nations goes. It used to be that the Native peoples, a big population, were along the rivers. So they would farm, not just find vegetables, fruits, and grains that were in the wild, they would actually raise crops. And then they would save the crops to have food through the winter. And they would supplement it with local hunting. So that would occur for a lot of the year, but during part of the year, they'd kind of close up shop and go out into the plains where they would be able to encounter buffalo, which, as I'm sure you know, are very large beasts. They're bigger than cows, and they have a lot of meat. So they would be killed, and then their meat would be dried and smoked and made into jerky, and would last through the year. Their hides were very important because it would keep people warm. You could make temporary housing out of their hides. And later, the traders would pay money for hides that had been preserved correctly. So the lifestyle was most of the time in one place if you lived along the river, and then part of the year moving about. So that was true for the people who were the river kind of people. But other people lived out on the plains, and they basically followed the buffalo and the other creatures to the south when it was getting to be winter, and then back up north. So they may travel hundreds and hundreds of miles. And when they're traveling, before they had horses, they would have dogs that would help them carry things, and all the people would have to carry things. And if you were very old or very young, sometimes you wouldn't be able to keep up. So that was kind of a problem until such time as there were horses available. The horses came to these people around the early 1700s. And remember, the Spanish had brought horses, and then they traded. They had horses get loose and so on. Gradually, the horses, reproduced and spread across the countryside, and the native peoples learned how to use them. That happened around the same time that people who were in the eastern part of the United States, which you've already read about, were being forced out of their homes by the settlers. They were making treaties that made them lose a lot of their land. There were sicknesses that were bad in the east, and so whole tribes were moving west. Well, when they got to the west, there were already people there, other native peoples. So sometimes they would push those people further to the west. Those that had horses sometimes would completely change their way of life. So there were a couple of different tribes that used to be mostly foraging and farming that became really much more nomadic once they had these horses and they could move about. And there were other people, for example, the Apaches, that have a reputation of being fierce fighters, Geronimo and all that. Well, early on, they didn't have the horses. The Comanche did, and they came from Texas and the north and to where the Apaches were, and were raiding them and so on, and the Apaches had to move away. So they ended up going to places like New Mexico that they hadn't previously lived. There were some Zuni and Pueblo peoples, and to the north there were some Navajos, but now we also had Apaches that had to move, all because the horses were available. I'm looking at my notes now to make sure I don't leave out anything. Some of the groups that used to be pretty sedentary that became much more nomadic with the horses were the Cheyenne, Crow, and the Dakotas. And the Crow became quite rich, so to speak, from having horses. There were only 400 households, and they had 10,000 horses. So they were able to use them to move about, but they could also trade and sell those if they wanted to. The Comanches had about 2,000 people at that time, and they had 15,000 horses. So, you know, really amazing. And they were able to be, both the Crows and the Comanche were very proficient on the horses. So they would be able to move things, including their old people and young children and sick people. They could move them, but they also could use them in war. And they were famous for being able to sling halfway underneath the horse and be able to shoot at their enemy. Sometimes they would ride up to the enemy. And the best thing you could do as a warrior was not to kill the enemy, although sometimes you killed the enemy. It was to whack them with a stick, and it was called a coup stick, C-O-U-P, which of course doesn't pronounce the P because it's a French word that they would say coup, and English would say coup. So they hit them with this coup stick, and if you could do that and then get away, then that would bring you the greatest amount of status, and you'd be the best warrior of all. Meanwhile, what's been going on with the European countries and the Americans, who had by that point become, by 1800, 1776, 1800, they are now another country. So the European countries and the American government were pushing through to this middle part of America. But then France, because of Napoleon, he needed money because he was having a huge 20-year war in Europe, and he needed money, and he didn't really see the value of having about a third of America, so he sold it to the US government. The Spanish lost a war, the Mexicans lost a war with us, the English lost the war with the United States government. When I say us, the US government. And so what happened was, in the early 1800s, from the eastern shore all the way to the western shore, there weren't any other governments there except in Sonoma County, because up the coast there's a place called Fort Ross, and maybe you've heard of Fort Ross. Fort Ross used to be a Russian outpost, and some Russians say it's still Russian because they say when it was bought they never got the money. Other historians say no, the money was paid. John Sutter, that I hope you might remember from your 4th and 5th grade US and California history, had Sutter's Fort in Sacramento. He's the one that had the stream up at Coloma with a mill that was cutting wood to build what later became known as Sacramento. And when that was being done, in the bottom of the mill trace where the water runs through, they found gold. And Sutter tried to keep it secret, but within months, the word went out worldwide, and people from everywhere were coming for the gold rush. But before that happened, the Russians said, well, we have this fort. The idea was that we'd raise food and take it up to the trappers up in British Columbia, Alaska, what we now think of as British Columbia and Alaska, where they had colonies, for example, in Sitka, Alaska. So they thought, okay, we'll go ahead and we'll take these food that we grow here in Sonoma County, what's now Sonoma County, we'll take it up there. And one of the things that they were going to grow were apple trees. So they tried to grow these apple trees and they failed. And it was one of the reasons why they sold Fort Ross and moved away. And if it hadn't happened, you might be speaking Russian because California might have become part of Russia. just like Alaska was. Remember, we bought Alaska from Russia? Well, maybe California would have been Russian. What happened with those apple trees? Gophers. Little gophers that if you have a yard in this county, you probably have gophers. And they go and they eat the roots on trees and bushes until they're dead. And the only way to prevent that is that you put aviary wire, which is wire smaller than chicken wire, little tiny squares around the bulb of the plant or the tree when you plant it. And if you do that, then you won't have gophers. But of course, they didn't have that kind of wire. They did get gophers. They did not succeed as far as raising enough food. They sold it off. And when they sold it off, then at that point, from eastern to western shores, there were no other European countries that thought that they owned part of America. Then we had the Civil War, as you know, and we were fighting to free the slaves and for other reasons why there was Civil War. And then when the war was over, reunited as a country with an incredibly big army, with all kinds of experienced people who knew how to be soldiers. And so these soldiers got sent into the plains. And why? Because we had settlers and first gold rush people, and then settlers crossing, going to Utah, Oregon, California, and so on. And the Native Americans would sometimes raid, want to have some sort of a toll payment made or something. And the other thing is that people wanted to take the Indians' lands to be able to farm it, to be able to take the minerals that were there and so on. And they're still trying to do that. And so the US Army built forts and basically took over, and sometimes in horrible ways. So you will be reading about, and you'll also be seeing in the movie about what happened in South Dakota when in one of, unfortunately, more than one case that's happened, where they killed everyone in a whole village. All 300 people got killed. So, okay, so where are we now? Where we now are is that treaties kept being made where people would be bribing people to sign treaties, getting them drunk and getting them to sign treaties, forcing them to sign treaties, and they kept shrinking and shrinking and shrinking the amount of land available. And one of the important things was that Congress passed a law that said that unused surplus land would be sold. And so they sold millions of acres of Native American land. So as we move up to the present time, there's lots more details for you to learn, of course, but as we move up to the present time, what we have are many Native nations in the plains who used to have a whole lot more land, a whole lot more resources, did not have alcohol, did not have other kinds of drugs, which are now very prevalent and unfortunately pretty cheap in all of these places. So now there's problems with poverty, alcoholism, drug abuse, and so on. And the hope is that as Native peoples remember their cultures, remember their language, develop more self-sufficiency, the US government and most states are now much more alert that they need to try to help and support Native culture so that the people can improve their circumstances over time. And we hope for improvement. But at the moment, it doesn't really look like a very good outcome as far as the Plains people goes. And so you'll read more about that. You'll watch videos about it. And hopefully the takeaway will be appreciation for the cultures, as well as a willingness to do what you can to bring about greater justice for Native peoples. So I'm going to tell you a little story because I thought, we've had a lot of depressing facts. Wouldn't it be kind of more fun to have something that was a bit of based on Plains Indians cultures? And pretty much all the Native peoples in America have stories, especially in the West, have stories about coyote. So coyote, in the olden days, for the Native peoples, they sort of saw animals as a kind of people. And they had spirits and they were intelligent and they could teach us things. And coyote is very wily. doesn't always behave himself very well, but you can learn from him. And that's why Coyote and other animals are in lots of stories. And of course, we have that in Western tradition too, in Western literature. Not so much with coyotes, but with other kinds of animals like foxes. And this story is about a fox and a coyote. So Mr. Fox went out and hunted and found a groundhog and killed the groundhog and then built a fire out of brush that turned into coals and put the groundhog into the fire. So it was kind of, Mr. Fox was kind of tired by then, so was taking a nap. And then along, sniff, sniff, Coyote smells that meat, smells good, wants to eat that meat, comes over, sees that the groundhog is done, pulls it out of the fire, and very carefully eats all the meat. And all that's left is bones, but then thinks, Fox will be angry when Fox wakes up. So Coyote had an idea. Took some of the grease from the groundhog and put it around the muzzle of the fox, and then put the bones back into the fire, then creeped off. Fox starts to wake up, can taste the grease. That's strange, I'm still hungry, but yet I don't remember having any food, and goes and looks in the fire, and all that's left is bones, and thinks, I guess I must have eaten it when I was asleep. And then Fox, of course, is also clever, sees that there's the footprints from Coyote. So Fox starts to follow Coyote's footprints. And he comes around to where there's a cliff. And he's thinking, I'm going to kill Coyote for stealing my meat. And Coyote's against the cliff, standing there. And then there's a little ledge, and then there's a bigger cliff. So Fox thinks, I'm going to get it. He gets closer and closer and closer to Coyote. And then Coyote says, come quick, get against the wall. And Fox does. And Coyote says, look up. And they could see the clouds going by. And Coyote says, you have to stand here and hold the wall, because otherwise it's all going to fall off over the cliff. And Fox thinks, okay. So he's standing against the wall, and Coyote runs away. After a while, the clouds are gone, and Fox realizes he's been tricked again. So he follows the footprints of Coyote down to where there's water. And by now it's getting dark. And Coyote is looking intently at the water and acts like he doesn't know Fox is there. Fox comes up ready to push him in, and Coyote turns around and says, look, in the water you can see a nice big pie. And in the water, sure enough, there was a glimmering orange circle. There was also a full moon. And Fox says, oh, I would like to have some of that pie. How can we get it? And Coyote says, I know, I'll tie this rope around your tail. And then you can go out and catch, because the water was moving rapidly, you can catch or grab that pie, and I'll pull you back in. And Fox thinks, should I trust Coyote? But it looks like a really good pie. So he says, okay. Coyote ties the rope on the tail, and then Fox swims out to where he thought the pie was, but he can't find the pie. And then Coyote has tied the other end of the rope to a rock, and he throws the rock into the water. Luckily, the rope slips off of Fox's tail. He swims to the other side to live another day, but is beginning to become a little skeptical about Coyote and whether he should continue to trust him. All right, I hope you like that. Okay, I'm going to do a share screen now, and I'm going to show you something from one of our quizzes. All right. I was asked by someone to give an idea about how to make it so that it would be easier to complete one question per minute, especially on multiple choice. So this is a question from the second exam, and you get 60 seconds per question, which I've done that amount of time with over 1,000 students at the JC and anthropology classes. So usually it's enough time for most people, but maybe not for everybody, especially if you're not used to this kind of a quiz. So my suggestion is that let's start our 60 seconds right now. Okay. The first thing I would do is read it. Why did the French Americans and so on? I'll read it to myself. You can read it. Read the whole question. Okay, so we're about 15 seconds in. I read the whole question. Probably you have too. The next thing is, can we eliminate? We're supposed to find the best answer. So can we eliminate? Columbus landing in India. That doesn't seem to have anything to do with anything. So, you know, we can just kind of cross that out. Indians were good linguistically. Well, there hasn't been much about that in the book. And then we have these last two, because each group was in danger of losing battles, each European group, if they did not have the support of the native tribes to fight with them, okay? Because native people loved to help Europeans with no concern about their own lands or gaining trade goods. Well, even at the beginning, when Europeans might have been loved a little bit, or at least appreciated as being different, people still wanted trade goods. So that's not a very good answer. Let's get rid of that one. And now we are at, I don't know, about 30 seconds, 30, 40 seconds. And we know that this would be the best choice, okay? So that's sort of a simplistic approach, but it's like, okay, no, that's not good, that's not good. Now I only have to choose between one or two maybe, and that makes it a lot quicker. If I'm running out of time and it goes 5-minute warning, 5-minute warning, and I'm nervous, maybe the best thing to do is put down some answers at the bottom, just picking anything quick, and then come back and change. No, wait a minute, I don't think you're allowed to change the answers. I take that back. So you just have to sort of pace yourself and try not to get nervous, because once you answer a question, of course, you can't get at that question again. Okay, so that's just a quickie little bit of sharing. Hopefully it didn't confuse you too much. Of course, this is a video that you can replay if you feel like I went over that a little bit too quickly. All right. So thanks all. That's all for this week. I look forward to seeing you again next week and also online. Thanks for joining us.